Hello, Pull Pounds. Noisy day. If you hear any extra noise, the chap next door's doing his car, the chap that way, the family that way. It's all a bit cross, so there might be extra noise. We don't know. I haven't been reading much horror this week. It's really weird, isn't it? But that's how it happens sometimes. I've actually been reading through my collection of Star Blazers, of which I've got, like, this is a tiny fraction. I've got quite a decent, oh, they're so cool, like a decent run of Star Blazers. They take me back to that nostalgic period when Star Wars was big and everything was about, like, cool sci-fi back when I was a kid. So I haven't prepped anything for this week, so I thought we might have a little look at some movie tie-ins, of which I'm very fond. But first, let's have a quick word from this week's sponsor.
Hey, stop! Don't throw Yorkshire Rider tickets away. Collect them in one of these. A saver's envelope. Then you can swap them for these. Clever, eh? They're bus bonds from Yorkshire Rider. The more tickets you save, the more of these you get. Whoops. Sorry, love. Could you open your bag? And you can get these or whatever you choose from Yorkshire Rider's gift catalogue absolutely free. From tickets to gifts. Now, that's the bus bonus. Only from Yorkshire Rider.
Movie tie-ins are so cool, and there's loads scattered throughout my house, but I've pulled out a few favourites that kind of epitomise some of the reasons why I love tie-ins. This is specifically movie tie-ins. There's a whole other video about TV tie-ins, trust me. So some of my favourite books that I own are movie tie-ins. Not necessarily for the content. It's just another piece of memorabilia from a film that I might love, or series of films. One of my all-time favourite movie I think this is my favourite movie tie-in that I own. It's the John Burke Hammer Horror Omnibus, which has got I've got my glasses down, haven't I? I can't read with my glasses down. It's got the Gorgon, Curse of Frankenstein, Revenge of Frankenstein, and Curse of the Mummy's Tomb. And it's just beautiful. Absolutely gorgeous. I have got the second one, but it's not quite as nice. I've got that edition, unfortunately, with I don't know who that's meant to be or what is meant to be peeping through. This has got the Reptile, Dracula Prince of Darkness, Rasputin the Mad Monk, and Plague of the Zombies. They're all written by John Burke, who was a heck of a writer and a brilliant anthologist. But yeah, that's an odd cover. I think it's meant to be Rasputin, but I'm not sure what is meant to be peeping out of. More favourites. Things like Tales from the Crypt. It's not the best adaptation. It's a little bit weird because obviously Tales from the Crypt, the movie, the Amicus movie, is based on the EC comics. So it's like a novelization of some comics, which we will address at some point, because I do want to do a video about Ron Goulart's Vampirella novels, which is going to be happening at some point. Back to John Burke, it's just the movie being a favourite and the novelisation being beautiful and just like a gorgeous item in itself. Dr. Terror's House of Horrors, and we've got some stills on the back. Look at the cush. Oh, if I could dress like that 24/7, I flipping would. And that's one of the main reasons I love tie-ins. I love movies. As I said in Sunday's vinyl video, I'm kind of obsessed with movies, as well as books and records and assorted things. Lots of obsessive behaviour. If you could see my house today, I'm still reorganising books. If you could see my house today, you would understand that book collecting is probably my most fervent obsessive behaviour. Another favourite is Inseminoid, which is a kind of faithful adaptation of Norman J. Warren's wonderful kind of... I'm not going to call it an Alien rip-off. It's a reimagining cash-in. Bless him. No disrespect at all to the memory of Norman J. Warren, because he made some amazing films, absolutely perfect and beautiful, low-budget British horror films. But sometimes they were inspired by current trends, and there is nothing wrong with that at all. So sometimes the movie novelisation gets a bit tenuous, where you can kind of tell it's obviously on the shelf in the bookshop, just to, like, that film's out and there's also a book with some relation to that film on the cover. This is a reissue of The Skull of the Marquis de Sade. It's a collection of stories by Robert Bloch. Obviously, when The Skull came out, and he's got Cush with his beady eye, just having a little nosy at a skull. It's just a lovely thing, isn't it? There's nothing fancy about it. Even more tenuous were the wonderful guys at New English Library who brought this one out. Fantastic Tales, Edgar Allan Poe, with a very familiar young lady on the cover, and some stills on them, some lovely stills on the back cover. But what this is a collection of Poe stories that probably had gone out of copyright, and basically it explains it on the back. There's it kind of mentions a couple of Poe movies or Poe inspired movies that had come out, like when just before this book came out. So it's not actually a tie-in. They've just probably got the rights to a few photographs from Poe adaptations and then put like a little collection of Poe stories out, and it says now a series of spellbinding films, not linked in any way, not from the same directors or studios or anything, just there's a spate of Poe movies, so we're putting a little Poe adaptation thing tie-in out. I love that. Also quite tenuous is people cashing in a little bit on an actor. Now I've got so many of these Boris Karloff ones, and so I've just picked one, otherwise we'd be sat all afternoon looking at them, and that's Christopher Lee's X Certificate. These stories aren't X Certificate, and not... Was Christopher Lee in any X Certificate films? I think some of the Hammer ones were, weren't they? Some of you lot will know. But this is actually an anthology allegedly co-selected by Christopher Lee and Michael Parry. And it's quite a nice anthology. It's Christopher Lee's Terror Trove. Bit of an uninspired cover. I quite like the kind of hypnodisc thing, but just to have Christopher Lee there, I know they had to have him on some way, but surely he could have dressed up as Dracula and done a photo or something. Bit of effort, Chris. Come on, mate. Another thing I love about tie-ins is things like this. So this is the novelisation. This is the tie-in for Witchfinder General, which came out in, was it 1968? Yeah, I think it was 68. It don't actually say on the book. Sure, it was 68. But this book was written in 1966. Not in readiness for the movie coming out. It's just a book about Matthew Hopkins. It's terribly dry. I don't know how they could take the story of Witchfinder General, or if you live in the States, I think it was released as Conqueror Worm over there. But, like, take the story of Matthew Hopkins and all the kind of crazy atrocities he was involved with and make it so dry to read. I'm sorry, Ronald Bassett, but I think it's like a history book. There's like actual maps and stuff. You know, it's like an accurate telling of what he got up to, but not lurid, not overemphasize any gruesome things, which if you've watched Witchfinder General and enjoyed it and think, I want the novelisation of that, you're in for a bit of a disappointment because you're going to get a history book. One thing I used to love as a slightly younger reader was reading novelisations of movies that I had no way of seeing. I couldn't get into the cinema if I was either underage or once films had gone off from the cinema, you'd never see them again. Occasionally horror movies would be on telly, but when I was a kid it wasn't constant, and a lot of the time I wasn't allowed to stay up and watch them on my mum and dad's little black and white telly anyway. So getting novels of films that look like hideous, gruesome affairs was tremendous fun. I've got 2 New English Library versions of The Incredible Melting Man by Phil Smith. That one's quite cool. The one I love most is the proper movie. That is a movie tie-in. It does say it's got the movie details on the back. But this is stills. Look at him. He's having like a lousy afternoon. Genius. So it let me at least read the stories of movies that I had no way of seeing. Films like Squirm, which I've shown in another video, I can't remember which one, by Richard Curtis, who is the Richard Curtis that wrote romantic comedies like Four Weddings and a Funeral that accurately depict British life in large cities. Of course they do. And then there's novelizations you pick up that kind of tell you about films that you didn't necessarily know about. I'd not heard of Death Sport. It was going to be a sequel to Death Race 2000, but feature largely on motorbikes, and it's about like dim and distant future gladiatorial combat type stuff. So finding this in a charity shop a few years ago, I immediately went online and managed to get a rather dodgy DVD of the movie, which is bonkers and brilliant. Another one I didn't know about, which is by a favourite kind of hack. Am I allowed to call him a hack? I mean it affectionately. Is I love Michael Avallone and collect his books, and I'd not really come across Carquake, but I'm glad I managed to see the movie because it's ace and truly ridiculous. Another thing that I really love about tie-ins is when they give you a bit more. So, for example, I love this one. I was so thrilled to get this. I've had this for absolutely years. When I was a teenager, I used to go into Leeds and go to Forbidden Planet and get Fangoria magazine just to get heads up on what was happening horror-wise. I used to get Fango, I used to get Gore Zone. My copies were all destroyed because I'd take all the posters out, stick them all over my walls. I remember above my bed when I was a teenager, I had a massive poster of Linnea Quigley like as a zombie chowing down on an arm, and my mum, bless her, was disgusted. It's like, I don't mind you having pin-ups on your wall, you're a teenage lad, that's fine, but why does it have to be like a pin-up of a zombie woman eating an arm. So yeah, to get the Fantaco one, they were always advertised in Fangoria, and I looked at postage and stuff like that. This is long before the days of the internet and online shopping was ever dreamed of. And postage was like ridiculously high, and the exchange rate was ridiculously high, and the efforts you had to go to buy, was it an international money order, which actually cost money before you you had to pay for your international money order and then put the money kind of towards it that you want, whatever value you wanted. So I never ordered from Fantaco. So it's like a publisher that as a teen I was desperate for some Fantaco stuff, because on the Fantaco ad page they had like novelizations of movies that I adored and still do, and like kind of model kits and Mars Attacks reprint cards and Dinosaurs Attacks cards and all that lovely kind of 80s horror merchandise. So yeah, obviously this is George Romero and Susanna Sparrow. And, Romero wrote and directed these movies. So it's his vision. And he knows these characters, and just the extra bits about their thoughts and feelings and just things that you don't quite get in the movie are all in here. And there's some glorious stills in the middle. Genius. Another interesting way of kind of getting more out of a book is if a film is based on the book and the book is reissued as the tie-in. I think it's quite funny sometimes a movie is based on a book and then there's a novelization of the movie that is exactly the movie. So it's like an adaptation of a movie which is an adaptation of a book. So you cut out the middleman, you get in like a rewritten book. Struggle to get my brain around that sometimes. An all-time favourite of mine is The Warriors. So the book came out... Did the book come out in the late 60s? 1965. And it is quite different from there's a lot of different stuff that happens in the movie, but it's essentially, the same yarn. But it's so nice when you know a film so well. For me, The Warriors is one of those films that's quotable. I loved it as a teen. I thought it was edgy and dangerous and just so dark and brilliant. And my 19-year-old lad loves it now for completely the opposite reasons. It's camp and daft. And him and his mates watch it and giggle along. How dare they? How dare they? The Baseball Furies were edgy. They may look a little bit camp now, but they were edgy. I would so be one of the Baseball Furies. I can't play baseball, but just need a blotchy eye and I'm off. And then you get odd things with tie-ins. I love odd things with tie-ins. So this isn't an adaptation. This is just an odd thing. It doesn't claim to be an adaptation. This is Edward Levy's The Beast Within. And there was a movie that came out essentially the same year as the novel called The Beast Within. And what happened was the people wanted to produce a horror movie. They bought the rights to Levy's novel before it was finished. So took the overall gist of the novel, but only had like a couple of chapters. So finished a script based on the start of the novel, and they are quite different. It's a corking book though. It's very, very good. But don't expect exactly the same as the movie, because it it's different. Not a bad movie though. One a kind of disappointment but oddment, but then not disappointment because it's genius, is John Russo's Return of the Living Dead. I've got 2 Hamlin editions here. I think this one is a little bit more gorgeous, although I do like that dude. But this one has got those chaps on. Look at those guys. That's a photo cover. Those guys were posed and sprayed with like comedic Halloween cobwebs. Put a suit on, we're going to spray you in cobwebs. Just look a bit gormless, and boom, you're on a book cover. So oh yeah, Nell favourite covers. In my New English Library favourite covers video, I showed the Night of the Living Dead novel, which I think is super stylish. Written by John Russo. I do like John Russo. He's a good writer. So for a few years, when I first, as a teen, when I was getting into zombie stuff, I'd seen the Return of the Living Dead movie, which I just adored. It had, like, it was rock and roll, punk. The soundtrack had, like, the Tall Boys, the Cramps, the Damned, TSOL, bands that I were, like, just getting into and discovering. But I didn't think, it wasn't like, surely these are popular somehow. I just thought they were fairly obscure. And then there's a whole soundtrack of brilliant stuff. And Linnea Quigley doing a thing, jumping on arms. Sorry, Mum. But hey, Linnea Quigley chomping on arms. It's particularly attractive for a teenage boy, especially in Return of the Living Dead. I digress. So this is actually a sequel to the novelization of Night of the Living Dead, and has nothing to do with the movie series. And it's set a while after Night of the Living Dead, and people are just coping. People got it sorted. One of the early scenes in the book is the funeral of a lass, and their family are there. They're doing the funeral, and it's just like spike through the brain, wallop, just because that's part of life. And it's a really interesting little kind of little piece of that whole Night of the Living Dead Romero zombie mythology, because John Russo was quite instrumental in that whole thing, you know, that night, dawn, day, and onwards. And the Return of the Living Dead book reads actually like a prequel to Dawn of the Dead. So it's worth getting, and it's not, I don't think it's super expensive. Having said that, I've not checked, so I apologise if I'm saying it's not super expensive, I've got 2. But then, like, you go online and it's like 60 quid, which a lot of books seem to be at the minute. Last one that I couldn't find a slot for. I just love it. It's the novelisation of Telly Savalas' spaghetti western called A Town Called Hell. But the novelisation is the American title, A Town Called Bastard. It just makes me laugh so much. I do love westerns, spaghetti westerns. I get a bit bored with the Sergio Leone ones. Not because I don't get bored with the film. I get bored about hearing about them. When people know you like spaghetti westerns, they go, oh yeah, the good, the bad and the ugly. And I'm like, Django? Sartana? Ringo? Have you seen Little Rita? You seen any of those? So it's just so nice for me as a kind of slightly more for... as far as British cinema audiences go, fan of slightly more obscure spaghetti westerns. Satana and Django aren't obscure, but yeah, the amount of people that thought like Quentin Tarantino's Django Unchained was like, and I watched it and I was like, well, it's not really the Django that I know. And they're like, why, has there been one before? I'm like, there's been like 30 odd. Sorry, I get narky about stuff like that. Me and Tarantino don't get along. We've got issues to work through. And I thought we were getting there until The Hateful Eight came out, and then I'm prepared to, to give a little on our relationship, but I'm not gaslighting, but it's Quentin. I'm trying. I digress. So yeah, just to have a vintage Nell, which this is, it's a gorgeous Nell, of one of my, a spaghetti western that I really loved, but I don't think A Town Called Hell would quite have the impact that A Town Called Bastard does. And I think it needs to be said in a Yorkshire accent. Nobody owns the word bastard like Sean Bean does. So I'll leave it there, you lovely folks. Thank you for watching, and I will see you all in the next video.